Hey, everybody, what's going on? Dr. Kramer over at Hope Upper Cervical Spine Center. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Spinal Corner, where we are taking the time to break down some basic knowledge surrounding your nervous system so that you, as a patient, can have better decisions regarding your health, especially when you are speaking with another doctor, another upper cervical practitioner, someone that is going to come at you with a lot of terms, a lot of knowledge, and you want to have the strength to ask the hard questions about, realistically, how do I know that my nervous system is functioning? And, more importantly, how do I improve that function? And so, our first episode, we covered the basics, right? We talked about the fact that your nervous system, when we talk about that for terms of just like education of basics of science, it is your brain stem, your spinal cord, and your nerves. All of that talks to your body, and then it sends messages from your body to your brain, right? This is the idea of a transaction, a safety pin that we talked about in episode 2, right? Because the purpose of the nervous system is to maintain the entire body in existence from conception to death using sensory and motor for a process that is called adaptation. And so today, what we are going to talk about is how we actually quantify adaptation. How do we measure it? How do we evaluate it? How do we find out if our symptom that we are presenting with is indeed a representation of a malfunctioning or a misfiring or a broken or overstressed, overstimulated neurological presentation? That is a fair question. That is one that you should be asking of yourself and one you should be asking of your doctor, right? Just because I have a runny nose doesn't mean I need antibiotics, right? That's the idea behind this. The idea is let's take this a step further. Let's evaluate the master system and let's see if it is indeed a problem there. So, without further ado, we're going to jump over to our screen share. We are going to focus on our wonderful presentation that we have. And we're going to get talking about evaluating your nervous system. So, if you remember episode number 1, right, we covered the parts of the nervous system. Okay. Episode number 2, we discussed the function of the system. Episode 3, we're going to figure out how do you evaluate? And this is a super important question, right? Because many of you, this is very abstract. You're like, why would I want to evaluate my nervous system? Right? For many of you to go in and get your heart checked out for like calcium scores or to get your cholesterol tested because you've been brainwashed into believing that causes heart disease is a way to evaluate something, right? It gives you a number, it gives you a measurement. It says, hey, man, am I normal or am I not normal? Right. And so what we have to do today is we have to dive into this idea of understanding really first the function and then how we evaluate the function, right? Because what we can look at are two ways to evaluate the nervous system. One, we can evaluate its motor presentation, or two, we can evaluate its sensory presentation. Motor is really simple. All of you have been to the doctor. You've all had a reflex test done, right? Where they take a little hammer and they hit your knee and you see if it like kicks, or they hit your elbow, see if it, does a little, kick out along those lines. That's a sign of a motor reflex, right? That's a really good evaluation for us to see, hey, is my motor system intact? That's one way. The other way we can look at the motor system, right? It's actually a combination of these two. I would dare say that the best evaluation is going to be a combination, is to be looking at blood pressure, right? Blood pressure is one, a sensory mechanism because you have to find out how much blood you need. And two, it is also a motor representation because it's looking at how hard it is currently pumping, right? You could probably put in there also your heart rate. And I would dare say that if we actually wanted to evaluate this entire system, the best analysis of that would be called heart rate variability, which is responsible for measuring the space in your OPQRST, which is that little, this guy, right? And those should all be different. And what that fraction difference is tells you how well your adaptation is happening, right? You develop something called like a P score, and it goes along those lines. That's not my area of expertise. But if you go into a doctor and you have a heart rate variability test done, recognize that this is studying your ability to adapt to stress, which is what we discussed in the second part of this, right? Sensory and motor, combine to make a process called adaptation. And when you have adaptation, you have increased survivability or decreased survivability, right? Lacking adaptation means you're more likely to die. Having great adaptation means you're more likely to live. Somewhere in between is where we exist, depending upon how far we push the needle towards adaptation or towards laziness and death. So, one way to measure neurological presentation, heart rate variability. Second way is going to be an EEG, right? That's going to be number 2 right here. And an EEG you have had done if you have some numbness or tingling in your hands, and they want to rule out the idea of a nerve entrapment, right? They may put some electrodes from your neck all the way down your arm into your hand. They run an electrical current through it. They want to see if there's any entrapment going on, like a carpal tunnel, a cubital tunnel, a brachial plexus issue, etc. Another measurement could be O2 saturation. You could look at blood panels. You could look at a Zeta scan. But the most important way that I want to talk about this today is going to be the gold standard, which is thermography. And more importantly on this, we are going to talk about something that's called paraspinal thermography. And this is an incredible study of how well your autonomic or automatic nervous system is adapting to the environment that you are subjecting it to, meaning your current existence. And so many of you may be asking the question, hey, doc, how do I find out if I am actually a candidate for upper cervical practice or if I actually do have a neurological problem? And these symptoms could be a result of that issue being presented in the upper cervical spine, which is a really, really good question. And my answer 99.999% of the time is a paraspinal thermographic evaluation. It's the gold standard. Came out early in the, this has been going on in chiropractic since the beginning, right? We can jump way back to like 1923. We had something called a nervoscope. It was a 2 metal probe that was used to find out, a heat differential. But more importantly, for your knowledge, paraspinal thermography is looking at the blood vessels of the surface of skin, right? And this is super important because all of you are very familiar with this. You all run temperature, right? You take a little probe, you run it on your head. You say, hey, I'm sweating or I'm cold. I have the chills. You have a fever, right? We are looking at blood vessels of the surface of the skin, more specifically on your neck, because this is an incredibly tightly regulated area of the human system. And the paraspinal thermography is designed off the work of a gentleman named Dr. Uematsu. He was out of Japan, and he looked at the thermographic representation of various diseases or symptomatic presentations over time. And he measured it and plotted it. And he is way smarter than I am at this work. But what he found was that we have these 2 states that we can look at. Is our body normal or is our body abnormal? And for many of you, that is the question that you have. Is my neurological system functioning or is it not functioning? Normal would be that process that we call adaptation. Normal would mean that your motor is working, check, and your sensory is working, check. Abnormal is going to be a process called maladaptation, or another word that you may have heard of is going to be called dys for dysfunction, autonomia, which is autonomics, meaning that your autonomic system is not working, meaning you are not adapting. That's what it means, which in this graph on this side, you will have bad motor and you'll have bad sensory, which will cause a graphical representation, which can be measured in the blood vessel of the skin of the neck. Pretty fascinating. So what we use paraspinal thermography for is a form of heat. It is called radiant heat as opposed to conductive. And it is heat that is emitted off your spine. And it is evaluating blood vessel diameter, which is a form of autonomic integrity. So we are looking at autonomic over here. I need to write these down so you all remember them. Autonomic, right? So when we have vasoconstriction, meaning our blood vessels are maintaining proper temperature regulation between the right and left half, you will live in the normal side. If you have an abnormal reading, you will live in the abnormal side. So you may be asking me, doc, what's the tolerance? How do I know? Well, if I take my right half and I subtract it from my left or my left from my right, your range here in normal is going to be 0 to 0.3 degrees centigrade difference between right and left half. Your abnormal, when we get into this, is going to be somewhere between 0.5 and 2.0 degrees centigrade. Now, it's super important here because we are a Western society. We think that the greater the number, the worse the symptom is. Not necessarily true, right? We just need to know, do you have normal, right? Or do we have abnormal? In my practice, I usually talk about your thumbprint, right? We people have some weird thumbprints, but should that affect how you feel about your thumbprint? No, it just is, right? I have a thumbprint. It's there, right? I know that happens. Is mine abnormal or is it normal, right? That's the question that I have to ask myself. The height and the quantity of the graph does not matter. What's more important is it repeatable over time? Meaning, is it a sign of adaptation, right? Or is it a sign of maladaptation? And so, what adaptation? I messed up over there. So, what we do is we get these graphs, right? We come in here, we say, hey, how's my nervous system performing? We say, yes, it is. No, it's not. On a yes, it is graph, you will have straight lines that are repeatable over time. This is the idea of a 0 to 0.3 degree functioning nervous system. You are doing awesome. You don't have a neurological problem that is related to your upper cervical spine. You may be saying, Doc, I came in, we had this consult, but I'm normal. I don't need the upper cervical care. Good. We need to get to functional med, right? We need to find out what's going on with that blood panel. We need to look at your diet. We need to look at your exercise. We need to look at toxins, right? We need to look at what's going on with sleep. We need to look at what's going on with stress. We need to look at meds, right? This is all a super important question, right? I even had a patient that came through here. She's already been through the loop with regards to like medical evaluation. She's gone to UT Southwestern. They've gone down to, down to Houston to go to the med school down there. And finally, it took a series of MRIs to find out that she had a spinal tumor that was causing all of her issues, right? That we could not see on an x-ray. Fascinating, right? There's a super important thing to rule out, right? It's very, very important to rule that out. So that's where we go over in this normal bucket. However, if you're in the abnormal bucket, right, we are more of looking at, hold on, I don't know what's going on here. Here we go. You will have repeatable squiggly lines over time. This tells me that you have a traffic jam in your upper cervical spine that is causing you to have the presentation of symptoms that you have. Now, people may ask us, well, Doc, doesn't everybody have a squiggly line? Well, no, actually, when we look at this, it's like 7 out of 10 are going to be having an upper cervical problem. So, if you're one of the 3 that falls up over here, we can find out ways to help you. But if you're one of the 7 and you live in this world, this tells me that you have a malfunctioning nervous system, that the surface dermal blood vessels are not constricting correctly, which is a sign of a lack of autonomic integrity, which is telling us that you, the patient, are a perfect candidate for having a problem with your nervous system, right? Now, I do know other doctors who do HRV with this. It's not my expertise. I don't have it. It's not my system. I haven't studied it. I haven't done it. So for me to comment on it would be doing you a massive disservice. However, if you do have an HRV test performed, many of you have a Apple Watch. I think an Apple Watch runs an HRV. It's not very specific, but it will do for your purposes. It will tell you how well you are adapting. And you'll often get signs on this that say, like, hey, your system is a little stressed today. Keep it calm, right? You got bad sleep last night. You ate something, you drank something. Something is contributing to the performance of your neurological state. So what we know is that underneath upper cervical care, we want to, 1, improve this graph by making it a straight line. And number 2, if you are one who documents HRV, you should see an improvement in your overall heart rate variability, meaning that you have a better regulation of the way your heart beats between every single beat per minute. So a quick recap today is that we are talking about how we evaluate the nervous system. We already know what the parts are. We know what the function is, but how do we measure that, right? Some of the ways we discuss this are going to be heart rate variability. You have an EEG if you're looking at carpal tunnel issues. You could be looking at blood pressure, O2 saturation. You can be doing a Zeta scan. But what we talked about most importantly was the idea of paraspinal skin thermography. Paraspinal thermography was founded by a guy named Uematsu, and he was looking at the blood vessels of the surface of the skin. We are more specifically honed in upon the neck. For those of you who know what normal is, normal means that your adaptation is good, your motor system is good, your sensory is good, your autonomic system is working well. For those of you in the abnormal group, you have maladaptation, you have dysautonomia, and you have poor function of your motor and sensory system, giving you these neurological symptoms that you come to us with: the vertigo, the Meniere's, the head fog, the brain fog, the migraines, the headaches, the trigeminal neuralgias, the seizures, the people dealing with insomnia, anxiety, depression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we are doing is we are evaluating a form of heat that is emitted off the blood vessels called radiant heat. We know that normal is 0 to zero point 0.3 degrees, and it is manifested in a graph that is 3 straight lines. We know that abnormal is 0.5 to 2.0 degrees centigrade when I subtract the right from the left or the left from the right, depending upon the greater number. We don't do negatives, right? And an abnormal graph means you are not adapting and you will have squiggly lines. It is then the job of the upper cervical doctor to evaluate your neurological state by looking at the influence of the structure to create straight lines. And so, without further ado, that is a complete assessment or an analysis of what you would expect in an upper cervical office to evaluate the integrity of your nervous system. Some people may use leg length inequality. I find it to be incredibly inaccurate, and I also find it to be not really followed the way that it's supposed to be followed or implemented in a practice, because that is some form of a pattern also, right? What you're looking at is the pattern in my leg lengths the same over time, right? And if that changes, it's a sign of adaptation. You'd have to match it to your graph and make sure both of them are going hand in hand. I am a big fan of using HRV because it is so well documented, or not HRV, I'm sorry, of paraspinal thermography because it is so well documented on the ideas behind what is a valid measurement of the neurological state of the autonomic system and what is not. And those two things married together can give for us an idea of saying, yes, you have a nervous system problem that is caused by your upper cervical spine, or no, you don't have a nervous system problem caused by your upper cervical spine. It could be something else. That, my friends, is the empowerment section of this because it allows you to know, hey, I'm actually doing okay, or I need some work done. Tune in next time for another great episode of the Spinal Corner, where we dive further into this idea of how we treat and take care of your neurological state.